The wagon wheels spun lazily in the evening air, the last revolution of a journey cut violently short. Fiona Harper knelt in the dirt, her shoulders shaking as tears carved clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. The contents of her life lay scattered across the hard-packed earth of the Texas Trail: broken dishes, torn books, and the splintered remains of her father's handcrafted furniture. Everything they'd packed for their new beginning in Colorado now ruined beneath the afternoon sun of 1874. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving another streak of dirt across her freckled skin. A shadow fell across her, and Fiona tensed, her breath catching in her throat. 3 men had attacked their wagon not an hour ago, shooting her driver and stealing their horses, leaving her stranded miles from the nearest town. Her fingers closed around a jagged piece of wood, a poor weapon, but the only one available. "Madam," the voice was deep but gentle. "Are you hurt?" Fiona turned to find a tall man silhouetted against the setting sun. He wore a well-worn Stetson, pulled low over his eyes, and a dusty duster that had once been tan. A revolver hung at his hip, but his hands were held open at his sides, non-threatening. "They took everything," she whispered, her voice raw. "My driver, poor Mr. Jenkins, they shot him when he tried to protect the horses." The stranger knelt beside her, and she could now see his face tanned from the sun, a strong jaw covered in stubble, and kind eyes that studied her with concern. "Name's Ethan Xavier," he said. "I heard the shots, came as quick as I could." He glanced at the body lying a few yards away. "Too late, I'm afraid." Fiona's hands trembled. "I don't know what to do. Everything we owned was in this wagon. My father sent me ahead to prepare our new home while he finished his business in Austin." Fresh tears threatened. "I have nothing now." Ethan's weathered hand covered hers, steady and warm. "You've got more than nothing, Miss Harper, Fiona Harper, Miss Harper. You've got your life, and that's a start." He helped her to her feet. "My camp's not far. We can sort this out come morning." "I can't just leave Mr. Jenkins," she protested. Ethan nodded solemnly. "We'll give him a proper burial first, then I'll help you salvage what we can." His eyes swept across the wreckage. "It ain't much, but it's not nothing either." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Fiona watched this stranger, this cowboy who had appeared from nowhere, dig a grave for a man he'd never met. His strong hands worked methodically, respectfully, and for the first time since the attack, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, but perhaps its distant cousin. When he finished, Ethan stood beside her as she said a few words over the grave. Then he removed his hat, bowed his head, and added a prayer of his own, simple, heartfelt words that brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered when he'd finished. He nodded once, then gently guided her away from the grave. "Let's gather what we can before we lose the light completely." Together, they collected the scattered remains of her possessions. Ethan found a small trunk that had survived relatively intact, and they filled it with everything salvageable: a few articles of clothing, a family Bible, some cooking utensils, and a small pouch of coins she'd kept hidden in her boot. "It's not much," she said, looking at the pitiful collection. "It's enough to start again," Ethan replied, lifting the trunk easily. "And sometimes that's all a person needs." His camp was modest: a small fire, a bedroll, and a horse grazing nearby. The horse lifted its head as they approached, nickering softly. "That's Thunder," Ethan said. "Best horse a man could ask for." Fiona approached the animal cautiously, reaching out to stroke its muzzle. "Hello, Thunder," she murmured. The horse nuzzled her palm gently. "He likes you," Ethan observed, setting down her trunk. "That's a good sign. Thunder's particular about people." "As he should be," Fiona said, feeling the first smile in hours tug at her lips. Ethan busied himself building up the fire and preparing a simple meal of beans and coffee. "It's not much," he apologized, handing her a tin plate. "It's more than I expected to have tonight," she replied honestly. As they ate, Ethan explained that he was a rancher's son from the northern part of Texas, on his way to Colorado to scout land for his family's expanding cattle operation. "Seems we're headed the same direction," he noted. Fiona nodded. "My father purchased land near Denver. He's planning to open a mercantile." She stared into the fire. I don't know what we'll do now. Your father's a smart man to send his most valuable possession ahead of him, Ethan said quietly. She looked up, confused. He clarified. He can replace merchandise and horses. You're what can't be replaced. Fiona's throat tightened at his words. I hadn't thought of it that way. Get some rest, Miss Harper. I'll take you to the nearest town tomorrow. We'll send word to your father and figure out the next step. He offered her his bedroll. Please take it. I'm used to sleeping under the stars. Despite her protests, Ethan insisted, and exhaustion soon overcame her. As she drifted to sleep, Fiona watched him silhouetted against the night sky, keeping watch over her like some guardian angel in dusty boots and a weathered hat. Morning came with dew on the grass and the smell of coffee in the air. Fiona awoke to find Ethan already up, tending the fire and preparing breakfast. Sleep well? He asked, handing her a cup of steaming coffee. Better than I had any right to, she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. The warmth spread through her cold fingers. Thank you, Mr. Xavier. Ethan, he corrected gently. Out here, formalities don't mean much. After a breakfast of hardtack and jerky, they packed up camp. Ethan secured her trunk to Thunder's saddle and helped her mount. I'll walk alongside, he said. Riverdale's about 10 miles east. We should reach it by midday. The journey was slow but not unpleasant. Ethan walked with easy, loping strides, and Thunder seemed content with his double burden. As they traveled, Fiona found herself studying her rescuer, noting the way the sun highlighted the auburn in his brown hair, the quiet confidence in his movements, the gentle way he spoke to his horse. Have you always been a rancher? She asked as they crested a small hill. Ethan glanced up at her. Born and raised, my father built our ranch from nothing after the war, taught me everything I know about cattle, horses, and land. He adjusted his hat. What about you? Always been a merchant's daughter, Fiona smiled. My mother died when I was young. Father raised me in the store. I can run numbers in my head faster than most men can with paper and pencil. I know every type of fabric, button, and thread a person might need. Useful skills, Ethan remarked with genuine appreciation. Not out here, she sighed, gesturing to the open landscape. Don't sell yourself short. This country needs people who can build something from nothing. That takes more than just muscle. He tapped his temple. It takes this too. His words warmed her more than the morning sun. For the first time, Fiona began to see her predicament not just as a tragedy, but as a challenge to overcome. Riverdale appeared on the horizon just as the sun reached its zenith, a small collection of buildings clustered around a main street, with a church steeple rising above the rest. It's not much, Ethan said, but they've got a telegraph office and a general store. We can send word to your father and get you some supplies. As they approached the town, Fiona grew conscious of her appearance. Her once fine traveling dress was torn and dirty, her hair falling from its pins. She must look a fright. Don't worry, Ethan said, as if reading her thoughts. These folks understand the hardships of the trail. The town's main street was bustling with midday activity. People stopped to stare as they passed a dust-covered cowboy leading a horse with a bedraggled woman riding. It wasn't an everyday sight, even in a frontier town. Ethan helped her dismount in front of the general store. Let me handle this, he said quietly, offering his arm for support. The storekeeper, a portly man with spectacles, looked up as they entered. His eyes widened at their appearance. George, Ethan greeted him. This lady's wagon was attacked yesterday. She needs help. The storekeeper's wife appeared from the back room, took one look at Fiona, and rushed forward. You poor dear, come sit down. She turned to her husband. George, fetch some water and let Sheriff Daniels know. Within the hour, Fiona found herself cleaned up, wearing a borrowed dress, and sitting in the sheriff's office explaining what had happened. Ethan remained by her side, occasionally filling in details about the condition of the wagon and the burial of Mr. Jenkins. Likely the Johnson gang, Sheriff Daniels said, stroking his mustache. Been hitting travelers along that stretch for months now. I'll send some men out to look, but... He shrugged apologetically. What about my father? Fiona asked. I need to let him know what's happened. We've sent a telegram, the sheriff assured her. Now, about your accommodations, Mrs. Miller at the boarding house has a room available. Fiona's heart sank. I'm afraid I don't have enough money for an extended stay. Ethan stepped forward. Put it on my account, Sheriff. I'll settle with Mr. Miller before I leave town. That's not necessary, Fiona began. It is, Ethan interrupted gently, and it's the least I can do. The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly as he looked between them, but he made no comment beyond. That's mighty generous, Xavier. Later, as they walked toward the boarding house, Fiona tried again to refuse Ethan's help. I can't accept such charity. You've already done more than enough. Ethan stopped in the middle of the dusty street. Miss Harper, Fiona, where I come from, we help folks in need because someday we might be the ones needing help. It's not charity, it's being human. His earnestness silenced her protests. There was something in his eyes, a steadiness, a certainty that made her trust him despite having known him less than a day. Thank you, she said simply. He tipped his hat. I'll check on you tomorrow. Got some business at the land office to attend to first. Mrs. Miller's boarding house was clean and comfortable, if plain. Fiona was given a small room at the back with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair. After the events of the past day, it seemed like luxury. She slept deeply that night, exhaustion finally claiming her. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the thin curtains, and the smell of breakfast wafted up from downstairs. After eating, Fiona made her way to the general store. The storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Bailey, had promised to help her find some affordable clothing. Good morning, dear Mrs. Bailey greeted her. I've set aside some things that might fit you, nothing fancy, mind you, but serviceable. As Fiona examined the modest selection, the bell above the door jingled. Ethan entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. Morning, ladies, he said, nodding to them both. Fiona couldn't help noticing how different he looked in the daylight, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. Without the layer of trail dust, he was quite handsome. Any news? She asked hopefully. His expression grew serious. I spoke with the telegraph operator this morning. There's been a reply from your father. Fiona's heart raced. What did he say? He's relieved you're safe, but concerned about continuing to Colorado. There's been some trouble with the land deal. He's asked you to wait in Riverdale until he can join you. It might be a few weeks. Fiona sank onto a nearby stool. Weeks, but I can't impose on these good people for weeks. Mrs. Bailey patted her shoulder. Nonsense, child, we take care of our own here. And you're not without resources, Ethan added. I spoke with Mr. Bailey this morning. He could use help in the store, someone good with numbers and inventory. Mr. Bailey, arranging goods on a shelf nearby, nodded in agreement. Pays not much, but it would cover your room and board at Mrs. Miller's. Fiona looked between them, overwhelmed by their kindness. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Ethan suggested with a small smile. It's temporary just until your father arrives. She took a deep breath. Yes, thank you. Over the next few days, Fiona settled into a routine. She worked at the general store during the day, learning the inventory and helping Mrs. Bailey with the books. The work was familiar enough to be comfortable, but different enough to be engaging. Ethan, meanwhile, concluded his business at the land office but showed no signs of continuing his journey north. He took odd jobs around town helping the blacksmith, mending fences at the livery stable, even assisting the carpenter with repairs to the church roof. Each evening, he would stop by the store before closing, tipping his hat to Mrs. Bailey and asking Fiona if she needed an escort back to the boarding house. She always accepted, and they would walk slowly through town, talking about their days, their pasts, their hopes for the future. Fiona learned that Ethan was the oldest of 4 brothers, that his mother had died of fever when he was 12, that he could play the harmonica but only knew 3 songs. He told her about his family's ranch, about the drought that had pushed them to look for new grazing lands further north, about his father's dreams of building a cattle empire. In turn, she shared stories of growing up in her father's store, of learning to read by inventory lists, of her mother's love of poetry that had been passed down to her through a small volume of Tennyson she kept always by her bedside, one of the few possessions saved from the wagon. Would you read some to me sometime? Ethan asked one evening as they stood on the porch of the boarding house. The request surprised her. You like poetry, he shrugged, a hint of color rising in his tanned cheeks. Don't know much about it. But I like the way you talk about it like it's something precious. It is, she said softly. Words can build worlds when reality disappoints. Their eyes met in the fading light, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. Tomorrow, he asked. She nodded. Tomorrow. The next evening, they sat on a bench behind the boarding house. The spring air was mild, and fireflies had begun to appear in the gathering dusk. Fiona opened the small volume carefully, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. This was my mother's favorite, she said, finding the page marked with a pressed wildflower. Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. She began to read, her voice gaining confidence as the familiar words flowed from the page. When she reached the final lines, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield, she looked up to find Ethan watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. That's how I want to live, he said quietly. Always moving forward, never giving up. Me too, she whispered. His hand found hers on the bench between them, his calloused fingers gentle as they wrapped around her smaller ones. They sat in silence as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. Days turned into weeks, and Fiona found herself hoping her father would take his time arriving. She had grown fond of Riverdale, of the routine she'd established, and most of all, of her evenings with Ethan. They had taken to having Sunday picnics by the creek that ran behind the town. Ethan would bring Thunder, and they would ride double to a quiet spot beneath a large cottonwood tree. There, spread on a borrowed blanket, they would share simple meals and complicated conversations. "What will you do when your father arrives?" Ethan asked one such afternoon, leaning back against the tree trunk. Fiona trailed her fingers through the cool water of the creek. "Continue to Denver, I suppose. Father's invested too much to turn back now." "And if the land deal fell through completely?" She looked up at him. "I don't know, return to Austin, perhaps." Ethan was silent for a long moment. "There are opportunities here, you know. Riverdale's growing, could use a proper mercantile." The implication in his words made her heart beat faster. "Are you suggesting my father should set up shop here instead?" "I'm suggesting that there might be reasons to consider it." His eyes held hers steadily. Before she could respond, thunder rumbled in the distance. They looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Storm's coming," Ethan said, standing quickly. "We should head back." They packed up hastily, but the storm moved faster than anticipated. They were only halfway back to town when the skies opened. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the dirt path to mud within minutes. Thunder nervously sidestepped as lightning flashed nearby. "Steady, boy," Ethan soothed, guiding the horse toward a small line shack visible through the downpour. By the time they reached the shelter, they were both drenched. Ethan helped Fiona dismount, then led Thunder to the lean-to attached to the shack. Inside, the one-room structure was dusty but dry. A small table, a couple of chairs, and a narrow cot were the only furnishings. "Cattlemen use these during roundup," Ethan explained, striking a match to light the oil lamp he found on the table. The warm glow filled the small space, creating a cozy atmosphere despite the storm raging outside. Fiona hugged herself, shivering in her wet clothes. Ethan immediately removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "You'll catch your death," she protested. "I've weathered worse," he replied with a smile. He busied himself gathering kindling from a small woodpile in the corner, soon coaxing a fire to life in the small stove. As warmth began to fill the shack, Fiona removed her sodden bonnet and tried to tidy her hair, which had come completely undone. She was acutely aware of Ethan watching her, his gaze soft in the lamplight. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "Even soaking wet and wind-blown." The directness of his compliment took her breath away. In the weeks they'd spent together, there had been many moments of connection, of hands touching, of meaningful glances, but never such an open declaration. "Ethan," she began, uncertain what to say. He crossed the small space to stand before her. "I know this isn't proper, being here alone, saying these things." He ran a hand through his damp hair. But that storm out there feels like a sign, Fiona. Life's too unpredictable to waste time being cautious with your heart. She looked up at him, this man who had filled her empty hands with hope when she did nothing. What are you saying? I'm saying I've fallen in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. I didn't plan it, didn't expect it, but there it is. Fiona's heart pounded in her chest. She thought of all the moments over the past weeks, his kindness when she was at her lowest, his patience as she rebuilt her confidence, his respect for her mind and abilities. Without realizing it, she had been falling in love with him too, day by day. I feel the same, she whispered, the truth of it washing over her like a wave. His eyes widened as if he hadn't dared to hope for her answer. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as she responded, her arms winding around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I should have done that weeks ago, he murmured, resting his forehead against hers. She laughed softly. Mrs. Bailey would have had your hide. Worth it, he replied with a grin. They stayed in the lined shack until the storm passed, talking about their feelings, about possibilities, about dreams they'd never shared with anyone else. When they finally returned to town, something fundamental had changed between them, a certainty, a commitment unspoken but understood. The next morning, a telegram arrived from Fiona's father. He would be arriving on the afternoon train in 2 days' time. The news should have brought joy, but instead it filled Fiona with a sense of urgency. There were decisions to be made, futures to be determined. She found Ethan at the livery stable, brushing down thunder after a morning ride. Father's coming, she said without preamble. Day after tomorrow. Ethan set down the brush and turned to face her. That's good news, isn't it? It is, but... She twisted her hands together. What happens after, to us? He took her hands in his, stilling their nervous movement. That depends on what you want, Fiona. I want you, she said with certainty. But my father will have to be convinced, Ethan finished for her. Then I'll convince him. True to his word, when Harold Harper stepped off the train 2 days later, Ethan was waiting alongside Fiona to greet him. Mr. Harper, a distinguished-looking man with graying hair and Fiona's same green eyes, embraced his daughter warmly before turning a questioning gaze to her companion. Father, this is Ethan Xavier, Fiona introduced them. He's the man who saved me after the attack. The two men sized each other up for a moment before Mr. Harper extended his hand. I owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Xavier. No debt, sir, Ethan replied, shaking his hand firmly. Anyone would have done the same, but not everyone did. It was you who helped my daughter when she needed it most. Mr. Harper's expression softened slightly. For that, you have my thanks. Over dinner at the hotel, Fiona and Ethan explained everything that had happened since the attack on the wagon. Mr. Harper listened attentively, his shrewd merchant's eyes occasionally darting between his daughter and the young rancher, noting their exchanged glances and familiar manner. So the land deal in Denver has fallen through completely? Fiona asked when her father explained his business in Austin. Unfortunately, yes. The seller misrepresented what he owned, Mr. Harper sighed. We'll have to start our search anew. Ethan cleared his throat. Sir, if I might make a suggestion, Riverdale is a growing town with no proper mercantile. The general store does well enough, but it can't stock the variety a dedicated merchant could offer. Mr. Harper raised an eyebrow. Are you in real estate as well as ranching, Mr. Xavier? No, sir, but I know opportunity when I see it. Ethan met the older man's gaze directly. And I know that your daughter has become an important part of this community in the short time she's been here. Is that so? Mr. Harper turned to Fiona. You've made an impression, it seems. Fiona took a deep breath. Father, there's something else you should know. She reached across the table and took Ethan's hand. Ethan and we've developed feelings for each other. Mr. Harper's expression remained carefully neutral. I see, and these feelings, they're serious enough to influence business decisions. They're serious enough to influence life decisions, Ethan answered firmly. Sir, I love your daughter. I know our acquaintance has been brief, but sometimes life presents opportunities that shouldn't be ignored. Like a mercantile in Riverdale, Mr. Harper asked dryly. Like finding someone who makes you want to be better than you are, Ethan replied. Someone worth changing your plans for. A long silence followed his words. Finally, Mr. Harper leaned back in his chair. Fiona, what do you want? She squeezed Ethan's hand. I want to stay, father. I want to help you build something here, and… She looked at Ethan. I want a future with this man if you'll give us your blessing. Mr. Harper studied them both for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Your mother would have appreciated the romance of it all meeting during a crisis, falling in love in a small frontier town. He shook his head. She always did enjoy a good story. Does that mean? Fiona hardly dared to hope. It means I'll look at property in Riverdale tomorrow, her father replied. As for the rest, Mr. Xavier, I believe we should have a private conversation. The next morning, Ethan and Mr. Harper walked through town, discussing everything from cattle prices to building costs to Ethan's family background. By the time they returned to the hotel for lunch, they were speaking like old acquaintances rather than cautious strangers. Well, Fiona asked anxiously when they joined her in the dining room. Her father smiled. I've purchased the empty building next to the general store. With some renovations, it will make an excellent mercantile. And, she looked between them. And, Ethan said, taking her hand, your father has given us his blessing with conditions. Mr. Harper nodded. A proper courtship of at least 3 months, and Mr. Xavier has agreed to bring his family to Riverdale to meet us before any formal engagement is announced. His family. Fiona turned to Ethan in surprise. He smiled sheepishly. I sent a telegram this morning. They'll be here within the month. It seems my father's land scouting mission is taking an unexpected turn. 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Ethan and Fiona stood beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek, surrounded by friends and family. The new mercantile was thriving. Ethan's family had established a ranch just outside of town, and Riverdale was growing rapidly, attracting new settlers every month. As they exchanged their vows, Fiona couldn't help but think of that terrible day when she'd knelt crying by her tumbled wagon, believing all was lost. How wrong she had been. What had seemed like an ending had been just the beginning. Ethan's hands held hers as they spoke the words that would bind them together forever. The same hands that had once filled her empty grasp with hope now offered a lifetime of love. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. As they shared their first kiss as a married couple, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers. Ethan's brothers whistled loudly, and Mr. Harper wiped a suspiciously damp eye. Mrs. Xavier, Ethan murmured against her lips. Mr. Xavier, she replied with a smile. Later, as they danced beneath lanterns strung between trees, Ethan pulled her close. Did you ever imagine that day by the wagon that we'd end up here? Fiona shook her head. Never. I thought my life was over. And now. She looked around at their families mingling together, at the town that had become their home, at the future stretching before them bright with promise. Now I know it was just beginning. She rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. A wise cowboy once told me that sometimes all a person needs is enough to start again. Ethan's arms tightened around her. And sometimes what looks like the worst day of your life turns out to be the best. As the stars appeared above them, Fiona thought of Tennyson's words to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. She and Ethan had found each other against all odds, and in doing so, had found a home, a family, and a love strong enough to weather whatever storms might come. From tears by a tumbled wagon to joy beneath a canopy of stars, their journey had only just begun.